Perfect. Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Dana. I'm from the Wolf Conservation Center in South Salem, New York. Some of you may have been there. I know Catherine has. Hopefully we'll have you guys join us at some point in the future. We are, I believe, a few hours away, but I think it's worth the trip personally. So of course we're here to talk about wolves of North America. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Let's see here. Okay, so hopefully this is showing up for everyone else. If you have questions, feel free to please type them into the chat or the Q&A, and I'll read them at the end. At the very end of the program, we might have the opportunity to unmute folks if you'd like to ask questions out loud. But if you think of anything as I'm talking, feel free to just type it out, and I'll try to get to everything that I can at the end. Okay, so wolves of North America. So at the Wolf Conservation Center, currently we have 32 wolves that live on site. They are all captive wolves, and the majority of them are endangered species, which I'll talk about in just a moment. So, very good incentive for you to come visit us, but we love doing these virtual programs as well because they enable us to reach people from all over the place and, of course, teach people all about wolves. Teaching people is one of the main things that we focus on at the Wolf Conservation Center, along with recovery and advocacy. So as a conservation center, we're not a sanctuary. We're not taking in injured animals and rehabilitating them, but we do want to release wolves into the wild. So the majority of our wolves have been born in captivity. In fact, many of them have actually been born at the Wolf Conservation Center. And really our goal is to recover these endangered species and then ideally release them back into the wild where they belong. So we are part of a federal recovery program. And so that means that some of our wolves get the opportunity to breed. And I'll talk about some of those wolves in a few moments. And then we also focus on advocacy. So one of our goals is to really create advocates out of visitors and supporters alike. Hopefully you will all leave this presentation as new wolf advocates. Maybe you already are advocates, but we'll talk about ways that you can, as an individual, stand up and help to protect wolves throughout North America. So 2 of our 32 wolves are our ambassador wolves. When I say ambassador, they're basically, teachers at the Wolf Conservation Center. These 2 wolves, Alewa and Nakai, they are siblings. They've lived at the Wolf Center pretty much their whole lives. They came to us as very young pups with the purpose of becoming ambassador wolves or educational animals. So these 2 have been socialized to people. They've been around people every single day of their lives, especially when they were young pups. And the reason for that is because wolves are naturally very wary of people. With that wariness, that means that sometimes we might not get to see those wolves. And we do know that it's important when you're visiting a place like ours that you actually get to see some of the animals that we're asking you to then hopefully support. So that's what our ambassador wolves do during our programs. When you visit, they are, right up by the fence. We don't allow interaction with them, but they're right there. They're very curious because they've been around people every day of their lives. They're not frightened by, umbrellas on rainy days or the sound of a cell phone ringing or something like that. Instead, they're quite curious. And it also helps that they do get snacks during these programs. And that can be a lot of fun for people to see how they communicate, how they move, and of course to see them having fun getting different snacks. One exciting thing about our ambassadors is that, they will live at the Wolf Center their entire lives. They are not eligible for release into the wild. And that means we can have a little bit of fun with what we feed them. So we get lots of donations. We're very fortunate to get donations from local organic markets. So meat that is nearing or past its sell-by date, but it's still perfectly good. They, stores just can't sell it any longer. They'll actually donate it to us. And that means our ambassador wolves get all kinds of different snacks. Sometimes it's pork chops. Sometimes it's, the really big turkeys around Thanksgiving that maybe no one purchased. Sometimes it's hot dogs. So they'll get all kinds of different snacks. And that's a really crucial component of their enrichment, though we do other enrichment activities as well. Whereas the rest of our wolves, we don't want them eating things that they might encounter if they're, for example, released into the Southwest, where there's a lot of ranching operations. If they've grown up eating beef at the Wolf Center, We don't know that there would be an increased likelihood that they would then attack cattle on ranches, but we don't want people to have any more reason to, really resist having wolves being released into the wild where they belong. So the other 30 wolves that live at the Wolf Center feed them their natural diet, which would be locally white-tailed deer. So deer that sadly get hit by vehicles, people will actually bring them to us or call us and let us know where they are. And if they're close enough, we'll go pick it up. And that means the rest of our wolves, the endangered wolves, get to eat their natural diet, which is, really important for them, and very exciting for us that we get to provide that for them. So Alewa, she is 11 and a half years old. Like I said, she's been at the Wolf Center the majority of her life, and her name means sweet pea. And then Nakai, of course, doesn't look like this any longer, but we're going to go through, what it's like to grow up as a wolf pup. His name means little saint or one who wanders, and he is 8.5 years old. So if you look at this image here, this is from when Nakai was about 5 or 6 weeks old. I'll go back a couple images so you can see on the right there, he's much lighter in color. But as a young pup, wolves don't have their outer layer of fur. And that's what gives them each their unique coloration. So they're actually just born with this dark undercoat. They're born blind and deaf, similar to dogs and cats. And they won't develop their eyesight. They won't even be able to physically open their eyes until they're about 2 weeks old. And their ear canals won't really begin to open until about 3 weeks. So you can imagine they are incredibly vulnerable at this young age. They're typically born inside dens. Because in addition to being blind and deaf, they also can't thermoregulate. They can't control their body temperatures. So they need to be in a nice, dark, warm, protected den, usually right by mom, where she's providing her body heat and, of course, food, and she's also protecting them. And then they have this dark undercoat that's very different from their adult fur because it also helps them to blend in. So it provides an added layer of camouflage. So having that dark fur is going to help them stay really well hidden in a dark den. So this is Nakai then at about 3 months old. So you can see now his fur is starting to lighten. So what is happening is he's actually starting to grow in that outer layer of fur. Now, the undercoat that he's born with, he will have that throughout his life, but only seasonally. So once he grows in this outer coat, this is the coat that stays with him his entire life. It will shed, but this is the coat that he will always be wearing, essentially. And it's what gives each wolf their unique coloration. So Alewa and Nakai, they look very similar. They both have that kind of light color fur. And he's starting to grow in those guard hairs here. So you can see kind of that wiry fur. And it's sort of coarse to the touch. So if you've ever pet an adult German Shepherd or a Husky, wolves kind of feel the same. It's not very soft fur, unlike the undercoat, which is very soft and very thick. And what these guard hairs do is they kind of work like a raincoat. So, just like our raincoats, they have kind of a layer to them that helps wick away moisture. That's exactly what a wolf's outer coat does. So it has a thin layer of oil on it, and it helps the moisture just slide right off of them. So if they're going through mud or they're in a rainstorm or even snow, that moisture is not going to cling to them. If it did, it would make them very cold. And if a wolf in the wild is out burning through all of its energy, shivering to try to get warm, that means it's probably not going to survive very long. So this outer coat helps them to stay dry, and the undercoat helps them to stay warm. And it actually can keep them warm in temperatures as low as -30 degrees. So, as we get into the really cold winter months, we do programs on site at the Wolf Center all year round, unless there's really, really bad weather. But that means sometimes we're out there in the freezing cold, and the wolves will be so happy. They are so content, and we'll be out there in, 2 sweatshirts, 2 jackets, gloves, hand warmers, hats, things like that. And we'll be shivering, and the wolves might even be panting. In the summertime, then they of course don't need that undercoat. So it actually becomes really one of our first signs of spring is the wolves will start to shed that dark undercoat underneath, and it starts to fly through the air like little tumbleweeds, and gets caught in the fence and things like that. It's pretty entertaining to see. So they look kind of scraggly for a few weeks in early spring. This is Nakai at 6 months old. So you can see he has those big paws. He's really starting to grow into them now. He has more of his outer coat, and his eyes have now turned brown. So if I go back to this photo here, you can see that his eyes are kind of a bluish gray color. And that's because they're still developing. Once wolves' eyes open, they still have a lot of developing to do. So their vision initially will be pretty blurry, and then it'll start to sharpen as they get a little bit older. So at this age, he can see very clearly, and his eyes are now their permanent brown color. And then this is what adult Nakai looks like. You can see he's very fluffy. So in this image, if you look at his right near his paws, there's a leaf on the ground. So this is an image that was taken in the fall. And so of course it's getting a little bit colder. So he's starting to grow in that dense undercoat and prepare for winter. Whereas by contrast, in the summertime, Nakai looks very scrawny. People are sometimes shocked at how the wolves look in the summer because they're much more lean than you would expect. The wolves that we see in movies and paintings and things like that, they're really fluffy. But in the summer, they're very skinny and they're very athletic. So this image here, probably some of us recognize. We have Little Red Riding Hood here, and of course the big bad wolf. If you think about a lot of stories that we grow up with, we have Little Red Riding Hood. We have the Three Little Pigs, the Boy Who Cried Wolf. And if you think about it, the common, bad guy in these stories is the wolf. So we're told over and over from a very young age that wolves are bad, that they're dangerous, that they're going to chase us through the woods. And even though we know these are stories, they do kind of contribute to this culture, this idea that wolves are dangerous, that we should fear them. And unfortunately, that means that a lot of people then want to harm wolves. They want to hunt them or trap them or poison them or just remove them from the landscape. But I'll talk about later, they are really important to the ecosystem. So it's really important that we allow them to live in the wild and that we protect them. So around here in the Northeast, there are no wolves any longer, unfortunately. There hasn't been a population of wolves in New York State in about 130 years. But of course, we do have lots and lots of wolf relatives. So this image does show Nakai. This is a wolf here. But the wolf relatives that we have living in the wild around here are coyotes. We have foxes, both red foxes, which are pictured here, and gray foxes as well, although they're a little less common. And then many of us live with a wolf's, closest relative. So even though coyotes look probably the most similar to wolves, and in many cases act most similar to wolves, their closest relative is actually the dog. So this is my dog, Georgia. She's actually sitting right by me right now, nudging me because she's trying to be pet. So Georgia doesn't look very much like a wolf. I'm sure many of your dogs at home don't look very wolfy. But it doesn't really matter what a dog looks like. They could be a pug, they could be a husky. They are all 98% wolf. So regardless of breed, all dogs are 98% wolf. And that is how genetically similar they are. So how much genetic material they share. So even though they might look pretty different, they are incredibly similar. And I think that's so fun when you think about, how some of our dogs act or beg for belly rubs or do all these tricks or sleep at the foot of our beds, that is an animal that's 98% wolf. So we're going to talk about the wolf species that we have in North America. Of course, this program is called Wolves of North America. So we have in the world, there are just two species, the gray wolf and the red wolf. The gray wolf then has multiple subspecies, so different types of gray wolf. So today I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to go through the ones that we have living at the Wolf Conservation Center. There are a number of subspecies, so it would take probably too long for me to go through each of them thoroughly. So our ambassador wolves, Alewa and Nakai, they are what are known as Canadian or Rocky Mountain wolves. Again, this is a type of gray wolf. This is the type of wolf that you would see out in Yellowstone National Park, for example. Then one of the endangered subspecies of gray wolf is the Mexican gray wolf. At the Wolf Center, we have 20 of them living on site. And then the separate species of wolf is the red wolf, and we have 10 of them living on site at the Wolf Center. And I'll go through each of these so you get to know them a little bit more. So this is just a map that you can, where you can kind of see the estimates of the populations in the US of different types of wolves. So to the right there in North Carolina, you can see that there are just 10 red wolves living in the wild, just 10. So this is a population that at one point went extinct in the wild, unfortunately. So what that meant is that there were none of them remaining in the wild. They were very close to being completely extinct, so lost forever. There were actually only 14 of them remaining when the recovery program for this species was started. And now, through lots of recovery efforts, there are 10 of them that are currently living in the wild in coastal North Carolina. Then, if you look at the bubble that says Southwest, that 196 wolves there, and you can see it's gray to indicate gray wolves, that tells you where the population of Mexican gray wolves is. And then these other bubbles show different, other different subspecies of gray wolves throughout North America. So if you added up all of the gray wolf bubbles in the continental US, it would be about 7,000 wolves. Again, these are pretty much estimates. And then Alaska's population of gray wolves is between 7 to 11,000. So they have a much bigger population, but of course, Alaska is a pretty enormous space. And so there's a lot more room for them and a lot less conflict with people. So the red wolf, they historically roamed the eastern United States. So in New York, this would be our population of wolf, particularly where the Wolf Center is in southern New York. This would be, you know, the wolf that lived around there. Then they would have spanned all the way down to Florida and over to the Gulf Coast of Texas. So again, there's only 10 living in the wild, and the Wolf Conservation Center currently has 10 living on site. So this map here shows you kind of where they historically lived. So that lighter blue or grayish color shows where red wolves historically were. And then at the bottom near Texas, you can see that little orange blob. That's where the final remaining wild population was in Texas and Louisiana. And that population was then brought into captivity when this species was rapidly going extinct through trapping and hunting and habitat loss. Those were the last remaining individuals in the wild. And that yellow little spot over in North Carolina is where that population, after decades of recovery, where wolves have now been released back into the wild. So again, only about 10 of them. This is what red wolves look like when they're first born. They are really cute. So here you can see that they have that really dark undercoat that we talked about with Nakai. And again, that's going to help them to camouflage in a nice dark den. You can see that their eyes are sealed shut and their ears are actually kind of flopped down on their heads instead of standing straight up like they will when they're adults. So again, they're blind and deaf. They can't regulate their body temperatures. They are really, really vulnerable at this stage. And we know that these wolves, they weigh only about 1 pound when they're born. So if you cupped your hands together, you could hold a little red wolf in the palms of your hands. They're about the size of a potato. They're pretty tiny. This is one of them getting weighed. So when wolves are born at the Wolf Conservation Center, we try to do as little as possible to intervene. It's very stressful for those adult wolves when we are in their enclosures because those wolves, the endangered wolves, we want them to remain as wild as possible. And so that means we really limit our interactions with them. The reason we want them to remain wild is if they have the chance at being released into the wild, which again is our hope for all of those wolves, we don't want them to associate people with good things. Even though, of course, we really care for these wolves, we want them to think that people are frightening because in the wild, they might encounter people that are looking to harm them. So it's in their best interest for them to hear people and run the other way. And so when we go into their enclosures, whether we're doing maintenance or having a vet visit to make sure the wolves are doing well, or checking on those young pups, it's very scary for them. And so they run away. And that might actually surprise you. We can pretty easily go into that den when there's young pups in there because the adult wolves run the other way. So this little pup is getting weighed very quickly by one of our vets. And we'll just do a quick health check when they're just a few days old, just to get an idea of how they're doing. Hang on one second. And then we place them back in the dens, and we don't check on them until they're 2 months old, although we can see them on our cameras. And then we'll have them seen by a vet who will come to us and check them out in their enclosures when they're 2 months old, 3 months old, and 4 months old. And that's when they're due for their vaccines. Aside from that, we're very hands-off. We really don't want to be stressing out these wolves if we don't need to be. This is just another cute picture. So you can kind of get a close-up idea of this little wolf pup's face. Sometimes they'll have a little blaze of white on their noses, but that fades as they get older. Sometimes they have little white toes as well. But, you know, they look pretty similar to all other types of wolves when they're first born, as well as, you know, some dogs. So this is a 6-week-old red wolf pup. You can see in that just month and a half, she has grown a lot. So she will be at this age trying solid food for the first time. Sorry, I have a tickle in my throat. She'll be trying solid food for the first time. She'll be exploring her den, exploring her enclosure, learning how to camouflage a little bit better than this. Her eyes are, of course, wide open, and her ears are probably the most obvious thing about her. Red wolves are actually known for having these really large pointed ears. And not only are they good for hearing, but they're also good for keeping their bodies cool in the hot summer months. So red wolves, because they mostly historically lived in the southeast, where the summer gets very hot and very humid, having larger ears like this is a great way for them to cool down their bodies when it's really warm out. So if you think about a very hot day, you know, sometimes it's just so warm and so humid that you just want to sort of sprawl out. You don't really want to move. You just need to cool down as best as possible. Well, having big ears like this on a red wolf, when their blood starts to flow through those ears, it gets a little bit closer to the outside temperature, which surprisingly enough is usually a little bit cooler than their internal body temperatures. So it helps cool down that blood before it flows back into their bodies, and it helps keep them a little bit more comfortable. If you picture animals that live in the Arctic, for example, so Arctic wolves, if you're familiar, or even just polar bears, they have really tiny ears, and that's going to help them to stay a little bit more comfortable when it's very cold, because having small ears like that are very close to their bodies and usually covered in thick fur, it's going to help to prevent frostbite. Because if those ears are far away from their heads, like a red wolf's ears, they're going to start to get frostbite and a lot of damage on the ends of their ears. And then this is what adult red wolves look like. So they're kind of brown, black, gray. And if you look at the backs of their ears and the backs of their legs, they have a little bit of a reddish color there, kind of copper color. And overall, they blend in really well with their surroundings. So here they're sitting on top of one of their dens. They have the trees behind them. And if they just hunkered down and didn't move, well, you might not be able to see them. We have this sometimes where we'll have groups on site at the Wolf Center, and I'll be teaching and saying, oh, you know, the red wolves, they must be on the other end of their enclosure where we can't see them. And then all of a sudden someone will say, I think that's one right there, because they'll see a little ear flick or something like that. And there's just a red wolf, you know, 20 feet from us in the enclosure taking a nap. And they blend in so well that we were unable to spot them until they moved. It's pretty fascinating. So then Mexican gray wolves, the other endangered species that we have at the Wolf Conservation Center, they were listed as endangered in 1973 as well. Similar to the red wolves, they also went extinct in the wild. Their population actually got down to only 7 remaining individuals. So they were very close to being completely lost to the world. So those 7 remaining individuals were brought into captivity, and they were then entered into a recovery program. And after a few decades of very solid efforts, reintroduction efforts were begun in the Southwest. So right now in the US, there's about 196 Mexican gray wolves living in the wild. They live in Arizona and New Mexico. There's also about 35 to 40 Mexican gray wolves living in northern Mexico. So if we're talking about the 196 that live in the United States, they are all as closely related as full siblings. So what we really need in these recovery programs is diversity. And that's part of what we do with our breeding efforts and our releases into the wild is we try to increase diversity. So we want to make sure that wolves that are breeding with one another, when they're paired together, we're not doing it based on personality, although of course that would be wonderful. We're doing it based on increasing that diversity. So when wolves are paired together, we want to make sure they're as distantly related as possible. When you don't have that diversity, you start to see inbreeding problems. So you'll start to see a higher frequency of certain diseases or mutations. You might see more sterility. You'll see a lot more challenges for the recovery and the survival of this species. So like I said, we have 20 Mexican gray wolves currently living at the Wolf Conservation Center. Our most recent gray wolves were, or our youngest were born this May. If any of you are familiar with what we do and our individual wolves that live on site, you might recognize these little ones. So we do have two wolves that this past year were able to have pups with one another. We call them Trumpet and Lighthawk. Those are the two parents. Those are just their nicknames. All of our wolves have two names. They'll have a nickname, and then they'll have what we call an alphanumeric name, which is just a letter and some numbers. Trumpet and Lighthawk are a great pair. They've had 3 litters together now, but this was their most recent. And this little pup on the bottom right, she was actually released into the wild the day that photo was taken. So you can see just how tiny she is. Her eyes have not yet opened. She can't hear yet. And of course, she can't regulate her body temperature. She certainly can't hunt for herself. So you might be wondering, well, why on earth would you release that little wolf pup? So she was part of a process called cross fostering. And what that means is you can take a pup that's born in captivity and you can place them in the wild with an adoptive family. So it can't just be any old wolf pack. It has to be one that has an adult female that has pups that same exact age. So she's already producing milk for her own pups. And this pup will be able to be added to that group and won't be, significantly smaller than everyone else in the group. There won't be a lot of competition. Hopefully they'll be able to survive alongside their new adoptive siblings. So these adult wolves, they accept these pups pretty easily. They certainly know that this pup is new, that they're different, they smell very different, but they are really all about family. And so the success of this is very high. So this is the little den that she was placed into. You can see that one of the members of that field team was crawling in between that little crevice to locate the pups inside to get a good look at them, as well as add this pup to that new wild litter. And this is where she was added into the wild in New Mexico in Gila National Forest. And this is what the landscape looked like. So her den site was sort of off to the right, past those trees and everything like that. You can see it's pretty wide open. It's a pretty big plain. And the wolves do very well here, the Mexican gray wolves. So how did the researchers know where this den was? It would be very unlikely that they could just walk out into the wilderness and locate the den by chance. Instead, the adult wolves actually had what are called GPS collars on. So GPS collars, they're a great research tool. They do involve a capture, which is very stressful to the wolves. And so it's something that biologists are trying to, figure out a way to get around. So hopefully one day we won't have to handle these wild wolves because we want to limit their stress as much as possible. But in the meantime, handling them just the once, they will be sedated, they'll be immobilized. It provides a ton of really important data that helps to protect these wolves in the long run as a species, not just as individuals. So you can see it's a collar, and then it has this big bulky battery pack, and that battery helps to power this collar, and hopefully it'll send out a signal for about 3 years. So if it was a smaller battery pack, you wouldn't get as much information, and that wolf would have to be handled more. So it's kind of a toss-up, and it looks very bulky, but it can only weigh about 4% of an animal's body weight. So why do we do this? It's not just because we love wolves, although of course we do, but wolves have a really vital role in nature. They have a very important job. So wolves are carnivores. So that means, of course, they're meat eaters. They're not exactly eating Little Red Riding Hood. They think she's actually pretty frightening. Instead, they're mostly hunting animals that we call ungulates. An ungulate is an animal that has hooves. So elk, bison, musk ox, moose, caribou, these would be examples of animals that wolves tend to eat most. Locally in New York State, our example would be white-tailed deer, for example. That's a local species of ungulate. So it's a lot of food. These animals can be, 6 to 7 times the size of a wolf. You can see this big, strong, healthy elk is being stared at by these two wolves that look pretty tiny in comparison. That elk, probably doesn't really want to be a meal. And so they'll likely defend themselves using their antlers, using their hooves. Even a small injury during a hunt for a wolf could mean that they don't survive much longer. If they get a cracked tooth, maybe that elk kicks them in the face and they crack a tooth, that might not seem that severe, but it could lead to infection, or it could just be so uncomfortable that they're not successfully able to continue hunting. They're not being seen by a vet in the wild. And even a wolf wearing a GPS collar, there's no way that a researcher is going to know that there's something going wrong. And so wolves have to be very careful. It's also just very difficult to catch these animals. So healthy elk or deer can run 40 to 45 miles per hour, and a healthy wolf can really only run 35 miles per hour. And they can't do it for very long. Although they can reach kind of a high speed, they can't sustain it. They're much better at running at 5 miles per hour for a longer period of time. So instead, what they do is they go after the animals that are a little bit sicker, the ones that are easier to catch. So whether they're sick, injured, elderly, or very young, these are the animals that wolves mostly go after because it's a way for them to kind of save their energy but still get food. So if you look at this deer, let's say she's very sickly. Well, she lives in a big herd. And so whatever germs she has, they're going to probably spread pretty quickly to the other deer around her. They're going to be drinking from the same water, eating from the same patch of grass, sleeping right next to one another. And so those germs might spread quite quickly. When you have wolves and other large carnivores in the area and they're trying to go after the sickly animals, because wolves are what we call coursing predators. They will chase after a herd and they'll catch the stragglers, the ones that fall behind. When they go after these sickly animals and they successfully kill them, they're actually really preventing the spread of that disease throughout the herd. So by removing this sick individual, she's not able to then spread her germs to everyone else. And that enables the strongest deer or strongest elk to survive and pass on their strong and healthy genes. And so overall, the population is kept much healthier. Whereas if you think of how humans sometimes hunt animals, humans tend to go after the biggest, strongest, most impressive animals. And in doing that, they're removing those genes from the gene pool. They're preventing them from continuing. And so that has an impact on the populations as well. So wolves do it in a way that really kind of keeps these wild herds typically much healthier. So then other animals really benefit from living around wolves as well. So grizzly bears, eagles, black bears, ravens, coyotes, foxes, these are just some examples of animals that do really well around wolf populations. And the reason for that is often because they're able to scavenge. So an animal that's scavenging is an animal that's eating something that's already dead. Wolves, when they make a really large kill, let's say they take down an elk, they're going to eat as much as they possibly can because they don't know when their next meal is coming. So they might eat over 20 pounds in one sitting per wolf, but there will likely still be food left over. And so these other animals will come in, and maybe when the wolves are napping or when they're, completely full and they're not eating any longer, they'll come in and they'll eat whatever's left over. And so they really benefit. And this is pretty much what is left. Just a skeleton, a spooky Halloween decoration. And even then, you'll still have some critters come and nibble on these bones. For example, mice, they really like to chew bones because they're a great source of calcium. And so it's really impressive to see how quickly a carcass like this will get kind of cleaned off. And even if for some reason it didn't, well, whatever's left will start to decompose and it'll kind of feed the soil. And so, of course, that will feed the vegetation around it. And so it all kind of goes back into the ecosystem in a really positive way. So all of this to say, it's very important, at least in our opinion, to recover wolves. And, it's not really a matter of opinion. In this case, it's science. The science backs it up. Wolves really balance the ecosystem. They're incredibly beneficial. They perform a lot of ecological roles that have great value. So they help small mammal populations. One way they do this is, when they're eating these large ungulates, they help keep their populations in control. If those ungulate populations get out of control, they're going to eat all the vegetation that's around. And that's going to start to cause problems for small mammals, for birds, for insects that really depend on that vegetation for food and for cover and other resources. So they really benefit from having wolves around. Like I just said, scavengers also benefit from the carcasses. And like we talked about earlier, they help to maintain healthy prey populations. So these ungulate populations are, much healthier in the long term because wolves help to limit the spread of diseases. So how can you help? There's lots of ways that you can help. Attending this program is a great way because not only are you, supporting the Wolf Conservation Center, but hopefully you're learning a lot of valuable information or something interesting that maybe you'll share with friends or family. But there's lots of other ways that you can help us at the Wolf Conservation Center. You can join our email list where you'll get lots of updates about programs, about exciting events, but you'll also get information about ways that you can kind of lend your voice to wolves. So you'll also see that under our Advocate tab here. So this is actually a screenshot from our website. So you would see this if you clicked Save the Wolves on our website. Under Advocate, you'll often see different ways that you can, sign a petition, send an email, make a phone call, things like that, where you can make it very clear to our lawmakers that you care about wolves and that you value the science that supports wolf conservation. You can, of course, donate. You can adopt a wolf. So we are completely run on donations and grants. We don't get any state or federal funding, even though 30 of our 32 wolves do belong to the government, those endangered species. They're not technically ours, although we do care for them. And so our entire program, our entire organization is run off of these donations. Adopting a wolf is symbolic, but it's a great gift. So if you're looking for a holiday present, it's very fantastic. You can get, a physical stuffed animal, things like that. You can get a certificate, and then you'll get updates on that individual wolf all throughout the year. And there's just lots of ways that you can really help our center continue with our work. And then another thing you can do is just raise awareness. So whether you're doing it on social media, whether it's word of mouth, talking to friends and family, watching a movie and saying, hey, wait a second, that's not wolves. That's not what wolves are really like. And telling them why. Encouraging people to participate in these different action alert campaigns, and then continuing to strive to demystify wolves. So make people more familiar with wolves. We try to make wolves a part of people's everyday lives. So if you follow us on social media, or if you begin to follow us after today, you'll see that, we post videos, articles. We try to make wolves a part of everyday conversation for people. And then if you'd like to help wolves in the Northern Rocky Mountains, currently these wolves are still at great risk of unfortunately being hunted. So gray wolves were added back to the Endangered Species Act recently, which was fantastic, but it excluded the population in the Northern Rocky Mountains. So wolves like Alewa and high. That's the type of wolf that we're talking about. They are still able to be hunted in these areas. And so we are able to, add our voices to petitions, to emails, things like that, and let the government know that we care about wolves and we're long overdue to relist that population and protect them. So I don't know if anyone has any questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and I'll check our chat. But you're also, I believe, able to unmute yourselves. And so if you do have questions, I'll do my best to answer some over the next few minutes. Let's see. Okay, I don't see anything in our chat. It's okay if you don't have questions. I'll just take it as a sign that I was very thorough. But if you do think of questions later on, you're always welcome to email us. I'll actually put our email address in the chat here. It's info@nywolf.org. And you can always email us if you think of something, 3 weeks from now, 3 months from now, you're always welcome to email us. All right, I don't see anyone unmuting. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed the presentation. Okay, well, if you'd like to continue observing wolves, getting to know the wolves we have at the Wolf Center, you can find more information on our website, which is nywolf.org. And we also have live webcams. So all of our wolf enclosures have at least 2 cameras in them. You can watch what the wolves are doing, particularly with the endangered wolves. Those are not wolves that you would necessarily see on site at the Wolf Center. And so you see a lot of really exciting activity. And I encourage you to keep an eye out in April and May. Hopefully, we'll have some wolf pups there. And we've had people from all over the world get to see these little endangered wolf pups be born, and then watch them over the first few weeks and months of their lives as they start to toddle out of their dens, they start to play, they meet their older siblings, they try meat for the first time. It is so fun to watch. It's very distracting, but it's really, really cute. And it's really amazing to get to see these endangered wolves grow up. All right, I don't think we have any questions. So thank you so much to Catherine and everyone at the library for putting this together. I really appreciate it. I hope everyone here has enjoyed the program and hopefully you're all now wolf advocates. But again, if you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to email us or call us and we're always happy to continue talking about wolves.
Thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having us. This was wonderful. All right. Good night, everybody. Happy holidays. Stay warm, stay safe, and hopefully we'll get to see you soon. Bye, everyone.